The first light of dawn barely touched the rooftops of Sagebrush Ridge when Lena Hart awoke to the groaning creak of the shop's back door. For a moment she didn't move. She lay on a pile of burlap sacks, inhaling the scent of stale grain, dust, and cold iron. Her thin blanket slipped from her shoulders and the morning chill bit into her skin. She pushed herself upright. The small storeroom behind Duke Wilder's general store was barely bigger than a tool shed. Crates of canned peaches leaned against the wall. A broken barrel sat in the corner. The wooden floor was splintered and the single window was so dirty it hardly let any sunlight through. Lena's pale blue dress hung on a hook in the wall. Her long dark hair tangled over her shoulders like an old rope tossed aside. She smoothed her dress anyway. It was habit. Hope. Something like dignity. Outside the front door banged open and she stiffened. That meant Duke was awake. That meant trouble. A rough voice rolled through the thin walls. "Lena? You up? I ain't asking twice." She hurried out of the storeroom and into the main shop. Duke Wilder stood behind the counter, already halfway through a bottle. He was a tall man, once handsome maybe, but years of whiskey and late-night poker had carved deep shadows under his gray eyes. His shirt was wrinkled boots, unpolished hair, greasy. He looked like a bad memory that refused to fade. "You move slow as molasses," he barked, slamming the bottle down. "Get the stall swept, then take that canvas sack and fetch me the herbs from the ridge. My head's pounding." Lena nodded quickly. Small gestures. Don't challenge. "Yes, sir." Duke squinted at her eyes, narrowing with suspicion. He didn't bother to hide. "And don't you disappear this time, girl. I know every trick you pull." Lena kept her eyes on the floor. "I won't." He shrugged, already bored. "See that you don't." She grabbed the sack, tied her hair back, and hurried out before he could change his mind. The sunlight outside was sharp, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Sagebrush Ridge was quiet at this hour. Just the wind whispering through the cottonwoods, and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer, warming for the day. Lena walked past the old church, past the watering trough, past all the townsfolk who pretended not to see the bruises on her arms. Folks in Sagebrush Ridge knew Duke's temper. They knew his drinking, his gambling, the way he treated the girl he called stepdaughter, but only when it suited him. But they looked away. People in the West often did. She followed the narrow trail toward the ridge where the rocks were reddest like dried blood and the sagebrush grew in wild, tangled heaps. Her mother had once taught her which herbs could stop bleeding, which could ease pain, and which could bring down a fever. Duke only wanted the ones that killed his headaches, from drinking himself stupid the night before. The trail climbed a few more yards. She knelt near a cluster of white-topped yarrow and began to gather it, carefully tying the stems with strips of cloth. That was when she heard it. A low, strangled sound, half-groan, half-whisper, carried on the dry wind. Her heart kicked hard. She rose slowly, scanning the trees. The ridge was quiet except for the buzz of insects and the flutter of a lone hawk overhead. Then she heard it again. A man's voice, weak. "Please." Lena's breath hitched. She followed the sound, stepping between two juniper bushes until the leaves scraped her arms, and then she saw him. A man lay collapsed beside a fallen log, his body twisted in pain. His shirt was torn along the side, soaked nearly black with blood. An arrowhead-shaped wound near his ribs looked angry and fresh. His boots were worn dusty from miles of travel. His hair was long black as nighttime creek water, tied loosely at the back. His skin carried the unmistakable warm copper tone of an Apache. His eyelids fluttered as she approached. "Please help me." He wasn't old, maybe 30, maybe just a little more, but the pain made him look years older. Sweat rolled down his temple. His breath came in short, shallow bursts. Lena's legs trembled. If Duke found out she helped an Apache, worse, hid one, he would kill her. She knew it as sure as she knew the sun rose in the east. And yet, looking at the man on the ground, helpless and alone, she felt something in her chest twist painfully. She knew too well what it meant to bleed in silence, to be hurt and ignored. Her voice shook. Hold still. Kneeling beside him, she tore a strip from her already torn dress and pressed it against the wound. His jaw clenched in pain, but he didn't cry out. She mixed the fresh yarrow with crushed sage leaves. She carried in her sack, pressing them firmly over the wound to slow the bleeding. "You'll make it," she whispered, though she wasn't certain. He opened his eyes again, dark, gentle, searching. "Who are you?" Lena Hart spoke softly. "Lena, I'll help you, but we need to move. Someone might pass by this trail." He swallowed hard. "Who can't walk far." Her pulse throbbed. She could leave him here. She should leave him here. But she couldn't. She slipped his arm across her shoulders and lifted him with all the strength her thin frame could muster. "Come on," she urged. "Lean on me." He did. Every step was agony, but together they moved slowly down the path, away from the ridge, toward the town, toward danger. Lena's heart hammered. If Duke Wilder saw, if anyone saw, but she kept going, because the truth was simple: this man needed her, and for the first time in her life she wasn't going to walk away from someone who needed saving. Not anymore. Lena's shoulders burned long before she reached the edge of town, but she didn't slow her steps. The Apache leaned heavily against her, his breath shallow, each exhale warm against her temple. Several times she felt his weight falter, as though he might collapse again, but every time she braced herself and kept him upright. "You're doing more than any stranger should," he muttered, barely audible. "You're hurt," she answered, her voice thin with strain. "That's enough reason." He didn't argue. They skirted around the back of the store, avoiding the main road where Duke might be lingering. The afternoon sun had begun to slip westward, casting long shadows across the alley. Lena paused, listening, no shouting, no heavy boots, no drunken muttering, drifting from inside. "Just a few more steps," she whispered. She pushed open the back door to the storeroom. The hinges creaked loudly enough to make her wince. Once she slipped him inside, she closed the door quickly and pressed her back against it. Her heart hammered, as if the whole town might come charging after them. The man slid down the wall to sit on the floor, jaw clenched with pain, sweat darkening his hairline. Still his eyes were alert, sharp even through the haze of injury. "What is this place?" he asked, voice tight. "My room," she said quietly. "If you can call it that." He glanced around at the crates, the single torn blanket, the cracked window, the makeshift cot made from stacked burlap sacks. "You live here?" She nodded. Shame flickered across her face before she turned away. She lit the small oil lamp, casting a flicker of gold across the cramped room. "You need more than herbs," she murmured. "Let me see the wound." He didn't move at first. There was a certain pride in him. Apache warriors were known for their steel. They seldom showed weakness. But after a beat, he slid his fingers up his torn shirt and pulled it aside. Lena inhaled sharply. The gash along his ribs was deep, uglier in the lamplight than she'd realized out on the ridge. It wasn't an arrow wound. Not exactly. It looked like a grazing gunshot, rough and still bleeding with small, stubborn trickles. "You're lucky it missed the bone," she whispered. "Lucky it didn't tear deeper." He managed to rise, smiling. "Never thought myself lucky." She knelt beside him, grinding fresh herbs between her palms with a practiced touch. "What's your name?" she asked. "Talon," he answered softly. "My people call me something longer, but Talon will do." Her hands paused for a fraction of a second. "Talon." The name felt steady, grounded like the earth beneath their feet. "I'm going to clean it," she warned. "It'll hurt." "Do what you must." She pressed the damp cloth against his ribs. Talon sucked in a sharp breath, but didn't flinch away. Didn't curse, just held still, muscles tight. Lena worked quickly but gently, layering crushed leaves, tying cloth, whispering small apologies that slipped out when his jaw locked in pain. When she finished, silence settled between them, gentle, fragile as dust. "Why?" he asked, finally looking up at her. "Why risk yourself for me? You don't know who I am." Her throat tightened. She sank back on her heels. "Because I know what it is to be hurt and alone." She pulled her sleeves up past her elbows. Even in the dim light, the bruises were unmistakable. Old ones faded yellow, new ones blooming purple and blue. Talon stared. The lines in his face shifted from surprise to anger, the kind that burns cold. "Who did this?" he asked, voice rough. "My stepfather," she whispered. Lena Hart's eyes darkened like a storm cloud, her pain etched deep in her gaze. "He beats you?" Talon asked, his voice low and steady. "Whenever he's had too much to drink or when I just breathe the wrong way," she said bitterly, a dry laugh escaping her lips. "He keeps me here like I'm his property." She looked away, the shame of speaking the truth out loud weighing heavy on her chest. Talon's hand reached out, cautious, as though afraid she might pull away. He rested it gently on hers. "You don't deserve that," he said quietly. "No one does." Lena felt her heart break just enough for tears to sting her eyes. She blinked them back hastily, wiping her cheeks with the back of her arm. "If Duke Wilder finds you here," she said, her voice shaking, "he'll kill you, and then he'll kill me for helping you." "I won't let him lay a hand on you," Talon replied, his voice firm yet low. "You saved my life. I'll protect yours." The warmth of his words settled into her, a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped her. She'd never heard anyone speak like that, not with such certainty, not with such deep conviction. Suddenly the sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the front of the shop, heavy, uneven, unmistakably. Duke Wilder's drunken stumble. Lena flinched and Talon tensed instinctively, reaching for a weapon he didn't have. "Don't move," Lena whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. "Don't make a sound. If he finds you, we're both dead." Talon murmured, his nod slow but resolute. Duke's voice thundered through the shop, slurring as he called her name. "Lena." "Where the hell are you?" Lena closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "Stay here," she murmured, barely a whisper. "Don't make a sound no matter what." She threw on her sleeves, pulling them down to hide the bruises, quickly wiping any trace of fear from her face. With a deep breath, she stepped out of the storeroom and closed the door softly behind her, leaving Talon in the dim glow of the lamp. She moved quietly across the floor, the sound of her footsteps echoing faintly as Duke's voice grew closer, his words thick with suspicion and whiskey. Talon's jaw tightened, his fist curling despite the pain in his ribs. He'd promised to protect her, and promises meant everything to men like him. If she called for help, even whispered it, he would come out fighting, wounded or not, because he had seen her. Scars felt the raw truth of them. In that dusty room, two broken souls had found something in each other worth saving. Duke's roar shook the shelves. Lena emerged from the back hall, her hands folded tightly in front of her apron, her face wearing the same careful mask it had worn for years. "I'm here," she said, forcing her voice steady. "I was sweeping." Duke narrowed his eyes, his breath rank with whiskey. "Funny," he muttered. "I didn't hear a damn thing." Lena lowered her gaze, her voice soft. "I'm sorry." He lurched toward her boots, scraping against the floorboards. "You'd go quiet if you were hiding something." Her pulse quickened. She could feel Talon's presence like a heartbeat just behind the storeroom door. If Duke opened it, if he even brushed against the hinges, everything would end in blood. "I'm not hiding anything," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. Duke leaned so close that she could smell the rot of whiskey on his breath, his eyes bloodshot veins spiderwebbed across the whites of his eyes. You'd better not be. I hear things, he muttered. People say the army's hunting an Apache around here. They say he's dangerous. Say he's wounded. Lena's breath hitched. Duke didn't stop there. I can't help but notice you sneaking food out back every afternoon. Her heart skipped a beat, but she lied without hesitation. It's for the stray cat. The orange one that wanders by the alley. Duke snorted, his fingers curling into a fist. You think I'm stupid? He grabbed her chin roughly, making her wince. You feed a stray man, Indian or not, and I'll skin the hide off you. You hear me? I'll make you regret ever breathing. Lena nodded quickly, swallowing the fire rising in her chest. He shoved her away and stalked toward the counter, muttering curses under his breath. The bell above the door jingled as he stomped out. Lena didn't move until his footsteps faded down the street. Then she slipped back into the storeroom, pushing the door open softly. Talon was exactly where she left him, tense, alert. I heard, he said softly. Everything. Lena leaned against the door, sliding to the floor, her body shaking. He's getting suspicious. I can't keep you hidden much longer. Talon's gaze sharpened with concern. If staying here puts you in danger, then I'll go. No. Lena shook her head fiercely, surprising herself and him. You can't even stand without help. And if the soldiers find you out there... She couldn't finish the sentence. Talon exhaled slowly. Then what do we do? Lena didn't have an answer. For the first time since she found him, fear gripped her throat, tightening like a noose. Duke Wilder wasn't the type to let suspicions slip away. He'd circle around like a predator waiting for a weakness to exploit. Still, Lena Hart forced a smile. Let me get you some food. Over the next week, she snuck bits of bread, a slice of salted pork, anything she could hide under her apron. Each time she entered the storeroom, Talon's face lit up with relief. And every time she closed the door behind her, she felt her world shrink just a little more. But in that small, shrinking world, warmth began to grow. They spoke in whispers, laughing quietly over shared scraps. One evening, Talon teased her gently. You know, this feels like two sweethearts sneaking around behind their parents' backs. Lena's cheeks reddened. Hardly. I've never been allowed anything close to sweetheart business. Talon smiled, one corner of his mouth lifting. Well then, maybe this is a first. Despite the constant fear coiling in her chest, Lena found herself laughing. You're impossible. And yet you keep coming back. He countered, his eyes softening. Sometimes after she finished tending his wound, their hands brushed and she'd pull away, too fast, heart pounding like a frightened rabbit. He never pressed, never pushed, just watched her with quiet patience. Lena didn't understand it. Late one afternoon, while the sky burned gold beyond the dirty window, Talon spoke in a low voice. You saved my life, he murmured, studying her face. No one from your town would have done that. She looked down. Huh. Maybe because everyone's too scared to do what's right. He shook his head. No. You're different. You're brave enough to fight for someone who ain't got nothing left. Lena swallowed hard. You deserve help just as much as anyone else. Maybe more. Their eyes met and something warm passed between them, a feeling that frightened her in a way she couldn't name. But the warmth didn't last. One evening, just as Lena finished tying on a clean bandage, Duke's voice boomed from the storefront. Lena, get out here! She jumped, almost knocking over the lamp. Talon reached out instinctively, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Something's wrong, he whispered. She nodded, her stomach twisting. I'll see what he wants. When Lena stepped into the front of the store, Duke stood with two men from town, Rhett Boone and old Jace Dalton. Both carried rifles slung over their shoulders. Duke pointed at her. Tell them what you've been doing. Doing, she repeated cautiously. Rhett scratched his beard. Your pa here says you've been sneaking off every afternoon, says he thinks you're hiding something. Or someone. Jace added, lowering his voice. The army's looking for a wounded Apache. They sent riders up the ridge this morning. Lena felt her knees weaken. There's no one here, she whispered. Duke narrowed his eyes. Then you won't mind letting us have a look around? Her throat closed. No, wait. He stormed past her toward the back hallway. Lena's blood turned to ice. Duke, please. He ignored her drunken confidence swelling as he reached for the storeroom door. Talon was behind that door, barely healed, unarmed, cornered. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had no weapon, no strength, no allies. But she had one thing left, desperation. She stepped between Duke and the storeroom, bracing herself against the doorframe. You can't go in there, she said, voice trembling. Duke's face darkened slow and mean. Move. I won't. The room fell silent. Rhett and Jace stared, taken aback by her sudden resistance. Duke leaned in close, his voice low and deadly. You're going to wish you never said that. Lena trembled, gripping the frame harder. Behind the thin wooden door, she knew Talon could hear every word, and she knew he would come out fighting if she screamed. She just didn't know whether either of them would survive. Lena's breath came in shallow bursts as Duke loomed over her, his shadow stretching across the narrow hallway like something alive. Rhett and Jace shifted uneasily behind him, unsure whether to step in or step back. The silence in the store thickened until it felt like a noose tightening around the room. I said move, Duke growled, reaching for her arm. Lena flinched at the familiar threat, but this time something inside her refused to bend. She pressed her back against the storeroom door, trembling but firm. No, she whispered. Not this time. Duke's face twisted with rage. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her off the door. Pain shot up her arm, but she didn't cry out. She'd learned long ago that screaming only fed his temper. Duke Wilder barked, "What's in there? What the hell are you hiding?" Rhett Boone stepped forward uncertainly. Duke, maybe we don't need to search every corner. The army might have already taken care of it, Jace Dalton muttered. But Duke snapped, "Shut up! This little brat's been sneaking off every day. She's got something tucked back here, and I ain't letting it slide." He shoved Lena Hart aside. She stumbled against the wall, catching herself just before her knees buckled. Duke's hand closed over the storeroom doorknob. Lena's stomach dropped. If he opened that door now, Talon would come out, fighting wounded or not. He'd kill or be killed in the blink of an eye. There would be blood on the floorboards, and Lena knew exactly whose blood Duke would try to spill first. Her heart hammered. Her mind screamed. But before Duke could twist the knob, a low voice slipped through the hall like a ghost on the wind. "Lena." "Talon." Duke froze. Rhett's eyes widened. Jace muttered a curse under his breath. Then the storeroom door cracked open, not enough for anyone to see inside, but just enough for Talon's voice to reach her. "Lena," he said again, quiet but steady. "We have to go." Now her breath trembled. "Talon." Duke turned on her realization, sparking like oil on flame. "You brought one of them bloodthirsty savages into my store." Lena shook her head desperately. "He's not Duke. Please, he's not what you think." Duke swung his arm, striking her across the cheek so hard she hit the floor. Rhett swore under his breath. Jay stepped back as though he wanted nothing to do with it. Duke stomped toward the door. "I'll kill him first, then I'll deal with you." He didn't finish. Because Talon stepped out, not charging, not fighting, but standing straight despite the pain, leaning slightly against the wall for support. His dark eyes were sharp as flint. His bandaged ribs peeked through his torn shirt, but his presence, his sheer will, filled the hallway like a storm. Duke staggered back a step, startled. "You..." Talon spoke before he could finish. "She saved my life," he said low and even. "And you beat her for it." Duke's face turned a violent shade of red. "You shut your filthy mouth!" he snarled. Talon shook his head once. We're leaving. Duke lunged for the rifle slung over Jace's shoulder. The hell you are! Talon pushed off the wall, grit in his eyes, pain burning through every movement but determination carrying him forward. Lena, he said calmly, ignoring Duke's drunken fumbling. Get your things. She scrambled to her feet, her cheek burning from the slap adrenaline crashing through her veins. She didn't have many possessions, just a shawl, a comb, and the thin blanket she slept under. She grabbed them in seconds. Duke finally managed to grip the rifle, but Rhett slapped a hand down on the barrel. Duke, Rhett hissed. You shoot him in your store, you'll have soldiers and the sheriff crawling all over this place. Use your damn head. Duke jerked the gun free, furious. Head's fine. I'm protecting my property. Lena froze. I am not your property. Duke raised the gun at Talon. Talon moved faster than she thought possible for a wounded man. He kicked the rifle barrel upward just as Duke pulled the trigger. The shot blew a hole clean through the ceiling, showering dust and splinters across the hallway. Jace bolted for the door. I want no part of this. Rhett backed away too, swearing under his breath as he disappeared out into the street. Duke rebalanced the gun, but Talon grabbed Lena's hand. Run! They burst out the back door and into the alley. Lena didn't look back. Talon limped, but kept pace. They reached the hitching post behind the store where Duke kept his old chestnut mare. Lena untied the horse with shaking fingers. Can you ride? I have to. Talon grunted. He swung into the saddle. Teeth clenched against the pain, he reached down and pulled her up in front of him, settling her between his arms. His breath was hot against her ear. Hold on. She wrapped her hands around the reins, her heart pounding like a manic drum. Duke barreled out the back door, screaming her name. Lena, you come back here. Talon kicked the horse's sides. The mare surged forward. They galloped down the alley, hooves pounding, dust rising behind them like smoke. Lena dared a glance back. Duke stumbled after them, rifle shaking in his hands. Little whore, you think you can run off with a damn Apache? You think you can steal from me? I'll hunt you both down. You hear me? Duke Wilder's threats faded as the horse carried them down the road. The town behind them became a blur of wooden buildings and startled townsfolk. Talon leaned close so he could speak over the wind. You okay? Lena Hart nodded, though tears streaked her cheeks. I think so. The air whipped around them, sharp and cold, but it tasted like freedom. Talon chuckled weakly against her hair. You know, he murmured, we look like two foolish kids running away because their parents don't approve. A laugh broke from her throat, small, disbelieving, but real. Maybe we are, she breathed. Talon grinned. If this is how young lovers run, I see why they do it. She laughed again, leaning back slightly against him, warmth spreading through her chest, despite the dangers snapping at their heels. Behind them, Sagebrush Ridge shrank into the distance. Ahead, the open west stretched wide and wild. For the first time in her life, Lena wasn't running from something. She was running toward something, toward someone, toward a life she had never dared to imagine. They reached the tiny settlement of Willow Bend just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sky. The town was hardly more than a handful of cabins, a well, and a weather-worn trading post. But to Lena, it looked like another world altogether. Quiet, warm, and untouched by Duke Wilder's shadow. Talon slid off the saddle with a sharp breath. His legs nearly buckled, but he steadied himself on the saddle horn before helping Lena down. She hovered near him, her hands half raised, unsure if she should touch him. I'm fine, he murmured. You're not, she whispered, but thank you for trying to be. A kind-eyed older woman, Nina Cross, who ran the trading post with her husband, spotted the pair and hurried over. Her gaze traveled over Talon's torn shirt, the makeshift bandage, the exhaustion etched across his face. Lord have mercy, Nina breathed. You're hurt. Come inside, both of you, before the coyotes start prowling. Talon started to protest, but Lena cut in, her voice soft but steady. Please, he needs rest. Nina ushered them into a small cabin behind the trading post. It smelled of cedars and warm stew simmering on the hearth. Lena helped Talon onto the cot while Nina rummaged through a trunk for bandages and tinctures. Though the woman didn't ask many questions, her eyes lingered on Lena's bruised cheek. Honey, you safe now? She asked gently. Lena swallowed hard. I think so. Nina nodded, squeezing her hand once before turning to Talon. Let's tend to him first. Then the rest will sort itself out. Days passed. Talon healed slowly. His fever broke, his breathing steadied, and color returned to his cheeks. Lena worked beside Nina, helping grind herbs, mend calls, and serve stew to travelers. At night, she sat beside Talon, reading aloud from an old weather-worn Bible Nina had lent her, though Talon mostly just listened to the sound of her voice. They settled into a rhythm, simple, gentle, strangely comforting. For the first time, Lena knew what it felt like to wake, without dread, pressing on her chest. One morning, Talon limped out to where Lena was carding wool beneath the cottonwoods. She looked up and smiled. How are you feeling? Like a man who owes his life twice over, he said softly. Once for the wound and once for the woman who wrapped herself around trouble to save her, save him. Her cheeks warmed. I'd do it again. He sank down beside her, wincing slightly. I know. As the breeze played in the cottonwood leaves above them, Talon watched her hands move gracefully over the wool, watched the way sunlight touched her hair. Something gentle stirred in his expression. You belong here, he said. Not in that store, not with that man. Her fingers stilled. I keep thinking he'll come for me. Talon shook his head. Not here. Folks in Willow Bend protect their own. Lena wanted to believe him. She almost did. For a while longer, peace held. Talon began hunting small game again. Lena wove blankets for the townsfolk. They shared meals, shared stories, shared quiet laughter beneath stars that stretched endless and silver over the desert. Then one hot afternoon, when Nina was at the well and Lena was alone weaving in front of the cabin, she heard a sound that turned her blood cold. A man's drunken holler slurred and mean a sound she'd never forgotten. Lena's hands froze mid-weave. Her breath hitched. Duke Wilder stumbled toward the cabin dust, clinging to the sweat on his face. His clothes were wrinkled and filthy, the bottle in his hands sloshing with each step. Rage burned in his eyes, but beneath it there was something darker. Guilt, a deep-rooted rot he'd carried for years. Thought you could run from me, he spat. Thought you could steal from me. That horse was mine, that food was mine, and your life is mine, girl. His voice echoed across the settlement. People emerged from their cabins. Nina Cross dropped her bucket at the well. Lena Hart rose slowly, palms sweating, legs shaking. Duke, leave, she said. He barked a humorless laugh. Leave. You cost me money, girl. You shamed me. Then you ran off with that filthy Apache like some cheap... Lena snapped back louder than she'd ever dared before. Enough. Duke stumbled closer, his words thick with venom. You think anyone here will protect you? You think they know who you really are? Tell him, Lena. Tell him how you lied, played the poor little victim. Her chest tightened. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Talon's voice rang out from behind her, cold and sure. Don't take another step. Duke swung toward him, sneering. There you are. The damn stray dog she dragged home. Talon stood firm beside Lena, his shoulders squared, despite the pain still lingering in his ribs. Duke raised the bottle as if to throw it. But before he could, Nina stepped forward, her voice steady and calm. That's enough, Duke. This ain't your land. You've got no claim on this girl. No claim, Duke snarled. I fed her, housed her, and this is how she repays me. Lena stepped forward, her anger trembling through her limbs. "Housed me!" She yanked up her sleeve, revealing old scars, the fresh bruises. "Is this what you call housing?" Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Duke froze for a moment, his rage flickering into something darker, something colder. But it was swallowed up by his drunken pride. "You always were weak," he spat. "You were born for being beaten. Your mama couldn't straighten you out neither." Lena's voice cracked, but she forced the words out. "Did you ever once treat me like a human being?" Duke snorted. "You ain't worth the trouble." A heavy silence fell over the settlement, sharp, brittle, dangerous. Then Talon stepped forward, his eyes as cold as Winter Creek water. "You're done here." Buck Slade. Nina's husband strolled up beside Talon's shotgun, resting casually in his hands. "You heard the man. Get." Duke spat into the dust, but his threats carried no weight anymore. Nina crossed her arms, and Buck chambered around. Duke turned wobbling and stumbled away toward the road, bottle still in hand. The townsfolk watched until he became nothing more than a shrinking shadow swallowed by the distant hills. Lena sagged her knees, threatening to buckle. Talon caught her, gently steadying her. "It's over," he whispered. She shook her head weakly. "Not yet." But it was. 3 days later, a rider from Sagebrush Ridge passed through Willow Bend with news. Duke had been found dead in a ravine outside town, the bottle still clutched in his hand. Too drunk to ride straight. Too lost to save. Lena listened to the news in silence. No joy, no grief. Just release, like a door unlocking inside her chest. She stepped outside, letting the wind brush warm across her face. Talon joined her quietly, his hand finding hers with an ease that felt like home. The cottonwood trees swayed overhead. The sky stretched bright and boundless. And for the first time truly, Lena felt unshackled. Free. For a long moment she watched the horizon where the rider had disappeared. Her hands still wrapped in Talon's. The wind carried the scent of juniper and warm dust across Willow Bend, stirring the loose strands of her hair. It felt different now, gentler somehow, as though the land itself had exhaled with her. Talon didn't speak. He stood beside her, steady as the cottonwood trunk behind them, letting her breathe in the new strange quiet. When she finally looked up at him, his expression held no triumph, no gloating, only understanding. "You're free now," he said softly. The words sank into her bones, but she didn't answer right away. Freedom was a strange thing, so heavy, after living without it for so long. "I don't know how to start," she admitted. Talon's hand tightened around hers, just a little, guiding her forward. One step at a time. That evening, Nina Cross insisted on cooking a big meal to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just warm cornbread beans, simmered with bacon and slices of peaches preserved from last summer. But to Lena Hart, it tasted like a feast. She couldn't remember the last time she'd sat at a table where the air wasn't thick with fear. After supper, Talon walked her back toward the small cabin they'd begun to share. The sky above Willow Bend glowed with 1,000 stars scattered across the deep blue. The night was still the kind of stillness that felt like a blessing rather than a warning. Lena paused halfway to the door, turning her face up toward the sky. "It feels unreal," she murmured. "Like I'm living someone else's life," she added softly. Talon stepped close, not touching her yet, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "This life is yours," he said quietly. "You chose it, you fought for it." She shook her head. "I didn't fight, I ran." "Sometimes," Talon said, "running is how you survive long enough to fight later." The way he said it made something inside her settle. They spent the next few weeks building a new rhythm. Talon's strength returned fully. His wound healed cleanly thanks to Lena's careful tending. Soon he was stringing his bow again, disappearing into the hills at dawn to hunt mule deer or rabbits. Lena wove at the loom. They'd lent her the rhythmic pull of the thread, soothing her in ways she hadn't expected. Talon always left her a strip of dried meat on the table when he returned, even on the days he pretended not to be thinking of her. She pretended not to notice, though she always smiled when she found it. The folks of Willow Bend came to know her first with cautious politeness, then with genuine warmth. Children ran past the cabin and waved, and Nina talked to her like a daughter. Buck Slade once handed her a sack of flour with a gruff nod, muttering, "Glad you stuck around." And Lena felt something she'd never felt in Sagebrush Ridge: belonging. Still, even as peace settled around her, she often caught Talon watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. As if he were waiting for something, waiting for her to claim the life she wanted. One afternoon, while sunlight spilled golden across the yard, Lena sat on a low bench outside the cabin, weaving a narrow strip of cloth. Talon approached, carrying a bundle of firewood on his shoulder. "You've been quiet today," he said. She shrugged lightly. "Just thinking." "About me?" he asked, though there was no judgment in his voice. "No," she answered honestly. "About what comes next." Talon set the firewood down and lowered himself beside her. "What do you want it to be?" She looked out at the hills beyond Willow Bend. The rolling sage, the red mesas rising in the distance, the cottonwoods rustling above them like soft whispering spirits. "I want to stay," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Here with these people, with—" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cloth. "With you." Talon's shoulders eased like he'd been holding tension for weeks. "Then stay," he said simply. She turned to him. "You want that too?" He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "Lena, I've wanted that since the day you carried me from the ridge. I just didn't know if you'd ever want to stand still long enough to call this place home." Her breath caught. Then slowly she leaned into his touch. His thumb traced the faint line of a scar near her temple, not with pity, but with reverence. "Scars don't shame you," he murmured. "They show what you survived to be here." Lena swallowed hard. No one had ever spoken of her that way, not like she was something whole, something worth holding. Talon stood and offered his hand. "Come with me." She took it. They walked beyond the trading post, beyond Nina's clothesline, to the small meadow at the edge of the settlement. The late-season wildflowers bowed in the soft wind, golden violet-white, rippling like paint across a canvas. Talon stopped in the middle of the field and turned to face her. "Lena," he said, his voice steady, "I didn't know where I belonged until you found me bleeding in that ravine. I thought my path ended there, but you pulled me back." Tears stung her eyes, warm and quiet. He reached for her hands, drawing them to his chest. "You saved my life. Now let me share it with you." She stepped closer, breath shaking. "Talon, we don't have to rush. We don't have to plan every sunrise." His forehead touched hers. "But if you want this, whatever this is, I'm here. I'll walk beside you as long as you'll have me." Lena let out a long, trembling exhale. "I want that," she whispered. "I want you. I want this life." Talon's hand slipped around her waist, gentle but sure. The meadow swayed around them. The sky arched bright above. And when he kissed her, it was slow, warm, patient, like the land itself had been waiting for the moment. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly. He threaded his fingers through hers. "Anywhere we choose. But for now—" He nodded toward the cabin, its lantern glowing softly in the dusk. "Home." Hand in hand they walked back through the wildflowers, their silhouettes framed by the sinking sun. A light breeze carried the scent of juniper, and somewhere in the fading light the world felt brand new. For the first time, Lena didn't fear tomorrow. She welcomed it. And so under the open western sky, Lena and Talon walked forward, two souls, once broken, now whole, building a life, carved from courage, tenderness, and hard-won freedom. Their story became a quiet legend, whispered across the desert winds, a reminder that even in the harshest lands, love can grow like a wildflower. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment so I can keep creating more exciting videos. Thank you all for listening.